Hello guys, this is Dark Fox Sage 2 and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Proposed to Shizuka While Sakura Loved Him Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. Shizuka-san, why did you hug me just now? The blonde man asked the dark-haired woman, effectively breaking the tension that was present in the air, having been caused by Sakura and Shizuka's fateful encounter. Naruto did this out of curiosity more than anything else. True to his usual airheadedness, he had not noticed the atmosphere that was currently between his pink-haired teammate and the dark-haired girl who he had come across after all that time away from her. Shizuka stared back at Naruto, breaking her gaze away from the other girl that was present in the room. She smiled at him warmly, before saying to him in her usual, calm tone, "Well, Naruto, that hug just now was a sign of me accepting you into the village. The kunoichi of Nadeshiko have had a long tradition of welcoming the men that we accepted and had come to acknowledge into the village by embracing them warmly. Before anything else, of course." She finished her explanation with her face expressing the happiness she was experiencing at that moment. Sakura raised an eyebrow at this, before thinking, aha, really now? Somehow, even if the dark-haired girl had managed to give a decent explanation as to her actions towards Naruto earlier, she still felt something inside her bothering her regarding the entire situation. She did not like the idea of this village tradition at all. Her teammate, on the other hand, still seemed lost and confused about the whole matter. He looked at Shizuka curiously, before asking again, not hiding the curiosity and genuine naivete in his voice, "Accepted? What do you mean accepted, Shizuka?" Sakura could not say she was surprised by this question from Naruto. He wasn't exactly the brightest person in the universe when it came to understanding girls, something that provided a stark contrast between him and his late master. Sakura would have thought that spending all that time around the white-haired man, who spent most of his time writing all those perverted books that were read by their Junin-sensei all the time that their team had meetings, would help Naruto come to understand the female mind a little. However, nothing had changed about him. He was still the same old clueless idiot, when it came to women and also loves. The pink-haired girl had a feeling what the answer was, and she was not going to let the dark-haired woman spill it to Naruto. It wasn't even the right time and place for Kami's sake. "Well, Naruto, simply put, accepting you means that one have." "Shizuka-sama, can you please explain the mission details to us?" Sakura interjected before the dark-haired woman could run her mouth anymore. She hoped that her teammate could understand what she was trying to do, even if she had quite possibly interrupted one of the most important events of his life in that village. Luckily to her, Naruto was a sucker for missions and was always eager to look for missions and could not wait to handle them as soon as he was issued the task by the Hokage. The blonde man hit his fist on his hand in remembrance, then said, "Oh," before looking at the dark-haired woman, his eyes shining with excitement. Then he said to her, in a cheerful voice, "Yeah, Shizuka-san. What's the mission? I'm dying to get one after being bummed for so long." The dark-haired girl clicked her tongue silently, to ensure Naruto would not catch on her disappointment after she had been interrupted while she was in the midst of something important. She mentally cursed at the pink-haired girl for her untimely interruption. But as she turned back to head to her desk, she had a feeling that there would be plenty more chances like this, so bidding her time and doing it again would not be too bad. After all, Uzumaki Naruto would be with her for quite a while. Shizuka took the scroll that was lying on her desk, unsealed it, and then unfolded it to begin reading the specifics of the mission that she had requested of the two. "Uzumaki Naruto and Haruno Sakura, your mission this time is to spend an entire week in Nadeshiko, away from your home village. and enjoy yourselves as much as possible while having your stay with us." The silence that followed after this statement was deafening. Naruto was the first one to speak, breaking through the silence. He looked as if he had just received a death sentence. He thought he had misheard Shizuka wrong, as he had thought that when they were being sent here it would involve something difficult that the kunoichi of Nadeshiko were unable to deal with, that they had to resort to asking for help from Konoha. This was not what he had expected to hear at all, and he felt a tad disappointed. Beside him, Sakura was beside herself with anger. She had thought that this was some sort of sick joke by the dark-haired woman in some twisted attempt to make fools of Naruto and Sakura before informing them about their real mission. After all that had happened to her that day and all the stalling that had happened to them, she had felt her anger rising to boiling point and was not going to stand for any more of this nonsense. She opened her mouth to protest, when Shizuka held her hand out in front of her to silence the pink-haired kunoichi. She had a feeling that things would go like this, but since she didn't want a scene to be created in her office, she decided it would be better to smooth things over before the situation went haywire. "Now, I need you two to listen to me first before jumping to any conclusions. I'm sure that both of you are wondering just what I'm getting at by announcing that you two are going to be taking a vacation in our village before going back to your home. Your Hokage, Tsunade-sama, had told the two of you prior to coming here that you were supposed to come and help us with an issue that had popped up in the village, right?" She waited a response from Naruto and Sakura, and once she saw them nodding in affirmation to her question, she decided to continue with her explanation. "Well, the thing is, she lied about the last part. We didn't need any help with anything really, and as you can see, the village is going on as peacefully as it always has. There really was no issue in the first place." Sakura felt her heart sink in her chest, a slight feeling of betrayal from her master having been the cause. Of course, there was no reason for Shizuka to lie about this fact. Her face portrayed the honesty in her words as much as the genuine expression on her face. Still, she could not understand why her master had made such a request, finding no reason whatsoever to send them to another village for vacation. But why would Ba-chan make such a request? I mean, if she wanted to send us here for vacation, she could have just told us to go to Nadeshiko village and meet up with you, Shizuka-chan, couldn't she? Naruto asked, voicing the uneasiness that Sakura had been feeling regarding this entire issue. Sakura was glad that he felt as confused as her and didn't just go with the flow of things, even after learning that the details of their mission was a hoax. Shizuka huffed a little, and closed her eyes, as her memories swam to a night 2 weeks ago, when she had been to see the blonde village leader of Konoha. That night, Tsunade heard a knock on her door as she was still working on some documents that had been left behind from her work during the day. Ever since the war, things had gone back to normal, with the village receiving its usual share of mission requests. Tsunade had grown tired of handling all this work, wanting nothing more than to retire at this point, but since there was no one in the village to who she could hand over the position of Hokage, she realized that she had to hold it for a while longer. After all, the fence-sitter of Iwagakure, Onoki, was still in power after all those years till he had turned into an old man, and he didn't look ready to relinquish the position anytime soon. Tsunade was almost the same age as him, so she had no business whining at that point in time. She heard a knock on her window, and was startled. The only person who ever arrived at her office in that manner was her deceased teammate, Jiraiya. Shizune had been sent off early by the Hokage, insisting that she would only be in the office for a while longer before setting off for the night. Tsunade quickly turned her head in the direction of the window, half expecting to find an enemy lurking there, when she saw the petite form of a woman standing there, her hair swaying in the wind. She was staring towards the moon. Tsunade found herself a bit taken aback as to who this woman was. But once she turned her face to meet the blonde woman's brown eyes, a flash of recognition crossed Tsunade's face. She had seen the woman in Yamato's report regarding Naruto's adventures once he, Guy and Aoba had set off for the Land of Lightning, the wood-style user informing her about Naruto's brush with marriage to the younger Kunoichi. However, according to Yamato, things had smoothened out between Naruto and Shizuka, so Tsunade found herself wondering why the dark-haired woman had decided to pop up at this point in time. More so, why she had popped up at the windowsill when she could have just used the front door and Tsunade would have still welcomed her normally. The blonde woman opened her windowsill, allowing for the younger Kunoichi letting her into the room. She guided herself to the opposite side of the Hokage's desk, and after looking back at the older woman to approve of her making herself comfortable, to which Tsunade nodded, she sat down, facing the blonde woman. Tsunade returned to her seat, then after sitting back again, placed her elbows on the desk to face the older woman. Shizuka, who had her hands on her lap, was the first one of the two to speak up. "I'm sorry to have appeared like this and on such short notice. I'm assuming that you received a report about me from your shinobi once they had returned, so I hope you'll allow me to skip the introduction part. I did not want to appear from your front gates since I did not want to draw attention to myself. I really hope I am not infringing upon like this." Tsunade was taken aback by the manner in which the girl was talking to her. She was speaking to her in a bit of a rushed manner, but still, her voice contained respect for the older, far more experienced woman. She had been raised well, Tsunade thought. Still, she wanted to know what had brought Shizuka here, although she had a feeling she knew what it was before the woman even spoke up. "You're not infringing at all, but I fail to see what would bring you here at this ungodly hour. Surely you could have waited till morning to tell me about this." Shizuka felt all the nervousness she had felt earlier towards this woman, having been revered as one of the legendary Sannin, slowly ebb away. She placed her arms on the locker in front of her, before replying to Tsunade's earlier question. "As I said earlier, I did not want to draw attention to myself during the day by appearing when the streets were bustling with activity and filled with people. The darkness in the night provides a good cover. However, the reason I am here is because I wanted to ask if I could borrow the company of one of your shinobi who I happened to come across during his journey, Uzumaki Naruto." Tsunade smiled a little under her hands that were currently shielding her mouth from view, before thinking that she had hit the nail on the head. Well, it wasn't really something that hard to think about. The only person in her village that had managed to leave an impression on the dark-haired woman was apparently the blonde idiot, so of course she would have wanted to see him again. However, Tsunade was still the Hokage of the village, so she was not eager to hand out one of her finest villagers as easily as that. "I had a feeling this was the case, but still, I refuse. Uzumaki Naruto is one of the finest shinobi from our village. Handing him over to you would certainly cause discomfort among the villagers, more so now that they regard him as a hero and feel as if he is fit to be the next Hokage after me," Tsunade protested. She understood where the dark-haired woman was coming from, but still, she couldn't let go of one of her own as easily as that. She had come to see Naruto as her own grandchild, just as much as Jiraiya had to. Of course it wouldn't be this easy, Shizuka thought, as she listened to the Hokage's denial of her request. However, she was also quite a determined girl herself, and would not allow herself to return to her village empty-handed. Not after making this trip here, so she had to do her best to make the Hokage see her line of thought. "I understand what you mean, Hokage-san. However, I really want him to come and spend time at our village for a week. I'm sure you listened to the entire story that happened between his master and mine, plus how it passed on to us. Naruto managed to talk me out of following a village practice I wasn't happy with following, and made me resolve to become stronger for my people and also so that I would be able to find someone I would be happy with so that I would marry them. While I haven't been successful with finding a man with whom I would wish to spend the rest of my life with, I have done my best as the village leader of Nadeshiko. The women and girls alike in my village look happier and full of life nowadays, and that is due to the way I changed my methods of ruling over my people. I have Uzumaki Naruto to thank for that. So please. Shizuka then proceeded to lower her head before the Hokage, something that caused the blonde woman to widen her eyes in surprise. She had not thought that Shizuka was this serious about the issue, but seeing her gesture at that point, she was dead serious about having Naruto come see her at the village. Allow him to come and spend time in our village. He will be able to relax and enjoy himself in the midst of our kunoichi. I want him to come and see just how much I've changed, and to give him a proper thank you for enabling me to have this new lease on life. I implore you of this. Discover more fan fiction books and literature. Privacy policy templates. The dark-haired woman finished her request, with her head still lowered in her plea for the Hokage to heed her request. Tsunade sat on her chair, keeping her gaze affixed on the younger kunoichi and pondering over her request. Well, she couldn't just dismiss her cold-heartedly after that honest display of her emotions. Thinking back now, Tsunade realized that her favorite blonde ninja had been quite bored ever since the end of the war, since he didn't get as many chances to leave the village as before on S-class missions or even A-class mission. He usually spent most of his days shut in his house asleep, while the rest of his teammates were caught up in their daily activities. He occasionally left the house from time to time, but this was only to get ramen from the shop and stock up on his fridge supply. Once that was done, he would then disappear from the streets of Konoha and confine himself to the comforts of his house. It was quite a bland and boring way to live, Tsunade realized. And maybe, what the younger shinobi needed right now was a change of pace. A break from the usual village patterns that he had already grown accustomed to ages ago. Shizuka's offer certainly offered what Tsunade thought Naruto needed at the moment, so the blonde woman made her decision. Raise your head, Shizuka. We are both village leaders. There is no need for you to lower your head in my presence while making a request. Tsunade spoke up firmly to the dark-haired woman. Shizuka did as she was asked. And once her green eyes met the brown eyes that were ahead of her, she had hoped that the woman would give her a favorable answer this time round. Well, you certainly do bring forward a strong case, I have to admit. So I will allow you to borrow Uzumaki Naruto for a while. I feel as if he needs this at the moment, just to break him out of the bored cycle he has been living in for a while now, Tsunade replied, and after catching the wisp of a smile that had appeared on Shizuka's face, she continued, however, I have two conditions that need to be met before I can allow him to go on this mission. Shizuka raised an eyebrow in curiosity, wondering just what the Hokage would ask of her. Still, she needed to get through this if she wanted any chance of being with the blonde ninja, so she asked Tsunade, what conditions are these that need to be met, Hokage-sama? Tsunade cast her gaze downwards, cleared her throat, before saying, first of, on no account is Naruto to learn about the specifics of the mission before he arrives at your office. This means that you are to ensure that whatever kunoichi Naruto comes across from your village does not reveal to him the true nature of this mission. Of course, I myself will not reveal the truth about this mission to him. I will instead tell him that an issue cropped up in your village and that I am sending him over in order to assist you. Is that understood? Shizuka took in each word the Hokage said carefully, before nodding her head in acceptance. Tsunade was well aware that Naruto was the type of person that would vehemently refuse an offer to go on vacation to a foreign land, as he would have preferred to remain in Konoha to do his own things at his own pace. So a well-thought-out fib like this would definitely cause him to leave the village in the hopes of handling a mission only he would do. The blonde woman chuckled at the thought on what Naruto's expression would be once he had found out the truth of the mission, but well, that was an issue that he would have to deal with once the time reached. The second condition is that Naruto needs a partner to go with to your village. I'm not expecting to send him alone, of course. The poor boy might get lost in the woods if I did that. Bringing back herself to the present after narrating all the events that had gone on in Tsunade's office on that fateful night, Shizuka opened her eyes to find herself looking at the duo of Konoha shinobi. Sakura was gritting her teeth in irritation, while Naruto was scratching his hair in frustration. Well, in a sense they had both been duped, so their reactions were understandable. "That damned old woman!" Naruto exclaimed while still running his hands through his mat of blonde hair. Well, Tsunade had been right about him not accepting the mission otherwise, so this had been a really effective method of getting him off his ass on the village. Still, he could not say that he found the idea of a vacation unwelcome. He had been dying to try out something new ever since things had gone back to normal in the village, so the chance had presented itself with this vacation. Besides, it would be a waste of time and energy returning to the village after they had just reached Nadeshiko, so staying here for a while was actually a pretty good idea. He removed his hands from his head and stared back at Shizuka, his expression a tad relaxed than it had been earlier in the office. And Shizuka was glad to see that he was not opposed to the idea at all, and, to a small extent, that he had not resented her for duping him into leaving his village. Sakura, on the other hand, was tapping a finger slowly on her elbow while her arms remained crossed at her chest. All the confusion she had been feeling earlier from the circumstances that had landed them into this scenario had all gone away, but still, she felt a bit irate at the fact that her master couldn't trust her to tell her regarding the mission specifics in private, since she could have done a perfect job of keeping the secret from Naruto. She felt a slight sense of disappointment in her master for not trusting her with something like this, but well. It was pointless crying over spilt milk. She would let Tsunade have an earful once she got back to the village. For now, all she had to do was relax and enjoy the rest of the week in the company of her blonde teammate. A small part of Sakura was actually looking forward to this. After having spent quite some time apart from Naruto, this was her chance to finally be with him. Sakura's heart fluttered at the idea, and she had to resist the small tinge of red that threatened to break out on her cheeks at that moment. She focused her gaze to the dark-haired woman that was standing in front of her and Naruto, and once Shizuka saw that there were no more traces of irritation present on her face like earlier, felt satisfied that the two had understood perfectly. "Now then, since we've gotten all that sorted out, why don't the two of you meet with Sanyu at the office entrance? She will guide you through the village, where there is something waiting for you from the villagers," Shizuka explained to the two teammates. Naruto's eyebrows widened in surprise, and a smile broke out on his face, much to Shizuka's pleasure. Little did she know, Uzumaki Naruto loved surprises. Being a stranger to them for most of his life, he turned to the girl beside him, and giggled at her cheekily. Sakura shook her head in defeat, and realizing that her teammate's curiosity was growing by the minute, turned to face the door alongside him, and with that, the two left the office of the village leader. Once they were gone, Shizuka settled herself into her seat, and once she closed her eyes to enjoy the peace and tranquility that was present in the solitude of her office, she felt a sudden gust of wind appearing behind of her. She opened one of her eyes to meet the face of her attendant and longtime friend, Takiwa. Takiwa was an imposing figure, easily towering over most of the kunoichi in the village. She had a slender physique with a very angular face framed by her short brown hair along with a dark shade of red lipstick. She was clad in a short, backless, red, full-body suit over mesh armor, along with a pair of arm-length gloves and a light orange sash. A long blue-green apron skirt which is open in the front. She also wore bandages on her wrists, covering all of her right left as well as her left thigh and leg. She carries an extremely long and thin katana strapped to her back. "You're back then, Takiwa?" Shizuka spoke to the elder woman, a hint of happiness in her question. She had sent Takiwa on a mission outside the village for a period of 3 days. And while she knew that Takiwa was strong, she could not help but worry for her safety each time the woman left the village on a duty assigned to her by Shizuka. Having the woman return at that moment set Shizuka's heart at ease. The older woman placed a hand on her hip, before replying, "I was back a few minutes ago, Shizuka-sama. Why didn't you tell them the full truth of what happened that night in the Hokage's office?" Shizuka was taken aback by what Takiwa asked her. "So you were listening in then? Eavesdropping isn't a good habit." She teased the elder woman, but seeing that Takiwa still held the same stern gaze on her that she had been having for a while now, placed her hands on her hips and then said, in a lower tone than before, "He doesn't need to know about that now. If he did it would probably make him resent me, and knowing that would break my heart. He will learn when the time is right." "And when will the time be right?" Takiwa exclaimed, a hint of annoyance present in her voice. She had clearly not been pleased by what Shizuka had done earlier, and intended for her to set things straight as soon as possible. The dark-haired woman closed her one open eye again, her memories drifting to that night in the Hokage's office not so long ago. Shizuka nodded in response to the Hokage's second request, having in her mind a faint idea of who Tsunade would send on that mission with Naruto. However, she was still pleased that she had been successful in what she had come here to do, so she prepared herself to get up and leave the Hokage's office. "Wait." Tsunade spoke up to the dark-haired woman, as she had gotten wind that she was preparing to exit the office. The blonde woman wasn't quite done with Shizuka yet, and she wanted to confirm something from Shizuka. "Is there something else left, Hokage-sama?" Shizuka asked, uncertain of what the older woman was going to say to her now. "Yes, and it has to do with what brought you here tonight. While I believe as much as you said that you want to spend time with Naruto in your village as part of a chance for him to rest and have a taste of fresh air, I find it difficult to believe that is the only reason that brought you here today. Am I right?" Tsunade questioned the woman, keeping her eyes fixed to Shizuka's expression. Something had not been sitting right with her all this time. Ever since the dark-haired woman explained her reasons for having Naruto over at her village, and the Hokage was intending to get to the bottom of it. Shizuka's eyes widened in surprise as she listened to the Hokage's query. Well, she had to hand it to the medical ninja. She had not expected to keep it hidden from her for long. More like, she was going to inform the Hokage once she had successfully managed to accomplish what she had on her mind for a while now. Still, now that the Hokage had managed to see through her ruse, there was no point of keeping it hidden any longer. So Shizuka decided to spill the beans. "I wasn't exactly planning to keep it hidden from you, Hokage-sama. But the matter itself is quite sensitive, in a matter of speaking," Shizuka said, and after looking at the Hokage, who looked all ears ready to listen to her explanation, decided to continue. "The truth is, after the recent events of the Fourth Ninja War, Uzumaki Naruto's fame has grown as the hero who saved the shinobi world. And of course our village was not spared from these tales of his glory. News of my encounter with him also reached the villagers' ears, and since the general reception that was received was that Naruto was a really nice person, who also had his fair share of looks, most of the women in the village have developed, as I would put it, affections for the blonde man." Tsunade's eyebrow rose in surprise, but since it all made sense to her, she decided not to question the issue too much. allowing Shizuka to continue her explanation, so that she could see where she was going with this, as she did not seem as if she was quite done yet. I have to also admit that I myself have found myself enchanted by Uzumaki Naruto, and I think about him more than I probably should. After days and days of this happening, and the general talk about him in the village, I have come to a conclusion that I would love to spend a lot of time with him, possibly for the rest of my life. So I have come to you seeking Uzumaki Naruto's hand in marriage, and since I am sure that most of the kunoichi in our village feel the same way I do, the 1-week rest period offers a chance for me to win him over and make him mine. Shizuka concluded her explanation. Her expression had remained the same, stoic one she always donned as she had begun revealing her desire and wish to the Hokage. Tsunade was quite astonished with the honest manner in which Shizuka had brought her case forward to the Hokage, and had to admit she was amazed at her straightforward nature and how she was not afraid to say what she really wanted. However, something baffled her about this. Ever since she had met the blonde loudmouthed ninja all those years ago in that town, never had she believed that any girl would come seeking his hand in marriage. Tsunade was well aware that Naruto loved Sakura deeply, owing to that time in the hospital where he had seen Sakura embrace Sasuke, and the hurt expression on his face was all that Tsunade needed to know that he felt very strongly about the pink-haired girl. She had the impression that Naruto would always love Sakura, no matter what other shows of affections he received from other girls. Still, Tsunade found herself being amused by this entire situation that she giggled a little, suppressing the laughter that threatened to break out and alert the shinobi walking outside anyway. It was sort of ridiculous that if she did not have an idea of what the dark-haired girl was like, she would have dismissed what she had said earlier as a really bad joke. However, she knew Shizuka was not the type to joke about something as serious as marriage, owing to the young girl's terrible ordeal with love in the past. Shizuka stared at the older woman as she giggled, while keeping her remarks to herself, as she awaited the older woman's response. Once Tsunade had managed to regain her composure, and was able to look at the dark-haired woman seriously again, she said, "It might be impossible, you know. Naruto already has a girl who he has devoted himself to. Although I'm sure you may have an idea of this already." Memories of her conversation with Naruto in that valley surfaced in Shizuka's mind, but nonetheless she clenched her fist and said in response, "I am well aware of the fact that Naruto loves Sakura, but still, I'm not going to change my mind. If there was one thing I learned from him, it was that you should always try your hardest to win over the one you loved, regardless of whether they held affections for someone else or not." Tsunade found herself impressed by the girl's answer, and found she nearly conceding defeat in that matter. However, at that moment, an idea flashed in her mind, and she grinned as she thought of something interesting. She decided to voice her offer to the dark-haired woman, hoping that she had a penchant for participating in bets. "Okay, I'll make a bet with you on this matter." "A bet, Tsunade-sama? What are we placing bets on, if I may ask?" Shizuka asked curiously again. "The period of time is the 1 week allotted for the vacation. If, and only if, you manage to win over Naruto in that 1 week and make him fall head over heels for you, I'll allow you to marry him, as you wish." Tsunade explained, and the bright glint she got in the younger kunoichi's eyes just then was all the confirmation she needed to know that Shizuka was okay with going through with this bet. Still, that did not stop the Nadeshiko village head from asking the next rational question anyone would ask in this situation. "And if I fail to win him over?" Tsunade smiled. "You will reveal to his teammate, Haruno Sakura, who I'm sending on this mission with him, about the feelings that Naruto holds in his heart for her, not missing a single word of what he told you about his feelings for her when you first met him." Shizuka was surprised by Tsunade's reply, but still, a bet was a bet. Failing to honor your side of the bet was poor sportsmanship. And she was needed to be diligent in all her dealings as the village leader. She closed her eyes a little in thought, then after a second of thought, opened them again to respond to the older woman. Okay, I agree to the bet. Shizuka then turned to look at her attendant who had been standing behind her, and responded to her earlier question. When I win him over. The two members of Team 7 slowly descended the stairs leading to the exit of the building they were currently in. Surprisingly, they had already been through 2 flights of stairs on their way down from Shizuka's office, which revealed to the pink-haired girl that this office was probably bigger than she had originally thought. She felt grateful to the auburn-haired girl for teleporting them directly to the village head's office, saving them the exhaustion they would otherwise feel if they decided to walk the whole way to her office. However, as she trudged down the wooden steps, she found herself continually getting distracted by what had just transpired in the dark-haired woman's office. It was her first time coming face to face with Shizuka, and well, the woman certainly beat all of Sakura's expectations of what she was like. Having the same eye color as the pink-haired girl, Sakura had to admit that the heavens were certainly generous with how they blessed the female warrior. Her body proportions would set any man's mind afray, and her bust size was certainly not something to scoff at. Sakura meekly shifted her eyes towards her own small bust, and then sighed dejectedly in mild defeat. More so, the attire that Shizuka had worn was certainly eye-catching, revealing to those who dared to look a small glimpse of what lay inside. Sakura could not help but feel that in some ways, she could not match the dark-haired woman. Additionally, she could not help but be bothered by the manner in which the dark-haired woman greeted Naruto once he and Sakura graced her office with their presence. The events were still vivid in Sakura's mind, as she remembered watching Shizuka waste no time in leaping to hug the taller, blonde man. She gently wrapped her arms around him, resting her petite head in his larger, manly chest. Sakura could still remember the way Shizuka's face beamed with glee as she rested herself on Naruto, and at the same time, could vaguely remember just how erratic her heartbeat had been at that moment. Of course, she would have told Shizuka to back off if she were in more familiar circumstances, but since the two teammates were in unfamiliar territory, Sakura had chosen to silence herself and keep her remarks to herself. It would not do well to foster enmity while they were still guests within Nadeshiko village. Jealous? Hinoka's words reverberated in Sakura's mind as she replayed the events that had occurred in that office, and at that moment, she realized that the green-haired woman could not have been more right. Sakura could feel her heart rate steadily increasing once she realized how close the relationship between Shizuka and Naruto was, owing to the relaxed aura she had around him, and could not help but feel left out. Of course, it would not do her well to jump to conclusions so early when she only knew about the woman from what Naruto had told her, but still, Sakura did not want to be caught by surprise again, like she had been a while ago when a certain lavender-haired woman had jumped to Naruto's rescue. Sakura's mind shifted to the time that the village had been devastated by the Akatsuki leader, Pain, and her blonde teammate had shifted the location of his battle with the orange-haired man after his previous onslaught when he was in the Nine Tails mode. Sakura had been summoned to the previous location where Naruto and Pain had been locked in fierce combat, to the aid of Hyuga Hinata. As she proceeded to heal the Hyuga girl, Hinata's guardian, who had been left moments earlier as the white-eyed girl rushed to Naruto's aid, narrated to them all that had transpired from the moment she left him to the moment she was defeated by the Rinnegan wielder. The pink-haired girl found herself amazed with how Hinata had put herself out there in order to save Naruto, something that she had been wishing to do herself for a while now but didn't know how. She had berated herself once in the presence of her captain, Yamato, about how the only things she did for Naruto were small and unimportant things. The wood user smiled at her reassuringly, before telling her that all that mattered were her feelings for Naruto. Of course, back then Sakura had taken these words to heart, telling herself that what she felt for Naruto was enough and that she didn't have to push herself so hard for him. However, as she cast the green glow from her hands on the Hyuga's limp body, she felt that she was not sure whether it was enough anymore. Hinata, you love Naruto? These thoughts ran through Sakura's mind, and unknown to her, she had begun looking at the girl beneath her in a somber manner. She was not sure exactly what to feel at the fact that Hinata had professed her love to Naruto, so she decided to shift that matter to the back of her head. Back to the present, she found herself being conflicted over the same matter, although with a different girl this time. Sakura was almost fully convinced that Shizuka held a special place in her heart for the blonde boy next to him, owing to the manner in which she looked at him and how she joyfully conversed with him. Knowing that yet another girl was contending for Naruto's heart made Sakura feel oddly lonely, since she was not sure how well she would take to the presence of another female figure in the man's life, after spending most of her life as a ninja by his side. She held pride in the fact that she was the girl who Naruto spent most of his time around within the village, and realized that if another person intruded upon her current comfort with him, things would definitely change. She was not sure whether she was ready for such a drastic change in her relationship with Naruto. Adding to her earlier sentiments, she could not help but fear that one day Naruto would grow tired and weary of pursuing her and go readily into the arms of a woman that already held affection for him. While she knew it was wrong of her to feel this way and that it was borderline selfish of herself, she still could not feel comfortable with the knowledge of the fact that Naruto might give up on her one day and choose someone else over her. You know, if you continue dawdling around him, another girl will steal him, for example, Shizuka. A small, inner voice within her told her. Sakura was startled by her conscience at that moment, immediately jumping to her own defense on the matter. Hey, I do my own fair share to get close to him too, you know. For example? Sakura made to respond to her conscience, but then found her lacking anything meaningful to say. She could not think of any possible retort she could come up to this remark, which made her realize that she may have not been trying anything in order to let Naruto know how she had began feeling about him a while back. At that moment, however, the most recent example came to mind, so she immediately made to respond to her conscience. I hugged him once he returned to the village after his fight with Pain. The pink-haired girl responded to her conscience quickly, her voice brimming with the confidence that she felt from that gesture. Thinking back on it, she realized that she had wrapped Naruto in her arms in the presence of the kids that had surrounded him at that moment, and unknowingly, in the presence of their silver-haired teacher, Hatake Kakashi, as well. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she became slightly embarrassed at how strongly she had expressed herself at that moment. Good work, Sakura. But ask yourself this: what good came from that? Sakura found she dumbfounded by this simple question, and came to a shocking realization that nothing had changed since back then. Naruto had still treated her with the same love and care that he always did, and remained oblivious to her growing affection for him. Sakura then feared that Naruto probably carried on with his life with the assumption that he was the only one among the two that held affection for the other. The thought made her feel strangely sad. Well, she realized it herself. Naruto was probably too dumb to realize what she meant back then when she hugged him in that manner. It wasn't really much of a long shot, since he reacted the same way when Shizuka had embraced him in her office as well. I'm glad you finally realized it. Keep in mind that Naruto is as dense as he looks, so I think he may have not caught on to what you meant back then. If you want him to really know how you feel, you need to be more direct about it. For example, by revealing them to him. Sakura immediately realized just how warm her cheeks had grown from that remark, and shook her head to rid herself of the idea that popped in her mind. No, never. It was completely out of the question. There was no way she was going to do something that embarrassing to her longtime friend. The last time she did it, in the Land of Iron, it came with devastating consequences, as Naruto saw through what she was intending to do and stopped her. At that point, Sakura had been utterly shocked at the harsh manner in which he had called her off, and for a maddening second, she thought that he no longer held the same feelings he had for her. Of course, she would later come to be proven wrong, since he referred to her as his girlfriend in the presence of the fourth Hokage once he arrived at the battlefield. If Sakura half-heartedly decided to pour her heart out to Naruto again, he would probably lose his patience with her, thinking that she took him for a fool, and worst-case scenario abandon her since he would think of her as nothing but deceitful. There was no way Sakura was going to put him through that anguish, so she decided to bottle these feelings to herself. Unfortunately for her, however, she hid her saddening feelings a tad too late. Naruto, who had been walking step in step with her, found himself growing increasingly concerned with how she had not said anything ever since they had exited Shizuka's office. He had expected her to comment on what she thought of Nadeshiko Village, since Sakura was not exactly the type to keep quiet when she found herself in a new environment. The blonde turned his head to meet Sakura's face just as she resolved herself not to let Naruto not to learn about her blossoming feelings for her. Catching sight of her slightly flushed face and the solemn look in her eyes at that moment, Naruto gasped in worry, realizing that there was something totally amiss at the moment. The first thought that came to his mind was that she was probably not feeling too comfortable about her first time in this village, so he set himself to making things better for her. Immediately, he stepped in front of her, halting her progress, and catching the pink-haired girl by surprise as she became aware of the man now standing in front of her. She looked up into Naruto's cerulean eyes, wondering what he was up to. Slowly, Naruto reached out his large hand, placing it on Sakura's equally as large forehead, startling her with the warmth that emanated from his palm. She then realized what he was doing, moments before he asked her out loud. "Sakura-chan, are you feeling okay? You don't look too fine." Naruto questioned the medic, and Sakura found herself feeling a bit sad about this. Even in such a situation, where she had been battling her inner feelings in order to protect him from the pain she would ultimately cause him if she decided to follow her heart, he was still placing her before his well-being. Naruto had never been afraid to express what he felt for her, and the thought made Sakura's heart sink a few paces within her chest. However, she found herself lacking the courage to call him out for this show of selflessness, effectively settling for a slight nod. Naruto then smiled softly at her, before slowly withdrawing his hand from her forehead. However, as he prepared himself to resume his original position beside her, he suddenly felt a small tug behind him. Curiously, Naruto looked back to see who was it that had touched him, finding that it had been Sakura. She grasped towards the edges of his orange jacket weakly, as if giving him a chance to pull away if he wanted to. It was Naruto's turn to pause in mid-motion, as he simply looked back to the face of the pink-haired girl behind him, which had an expression etched on it that he could not exactly point out. Still, since it was different from the usually readable expressions that graced her face most of the times, he realized that it was a definite cause for worry. "Sakura-chan," Naruto started, but at that moment, his teammate's voice cut across his own, catching him in mild surprise. "Naruto, Sakura said, and for a maddening second she was gripped by the desire to pour out all that she was feeling at the moment right there and then to the blonde man. Sakura had no second thoughts regarding the fact that Naruto would definitely lend an ear to all her woes, owing to the concern he had expressed for her regarding her odd behavior. and she wanted to let out all the conflict she was experiencing at that moment in her heart, which was centered on him. She would have, if it wasn't for the interference that chose to show up at that precise moment. Come on, Naruto-sama, Sakura-san. You're missing out on a lot in our home. A third voice immediately cut across the serene atmosphere that Naruto and Sakura were currently enjoying at the moment. Immediately, the pink-haired girl was pulled back to her senses as she immediately let go of Naruto's jacket, praying that whoever had spoken to both of them had not witnessed her moment of weakness just then. At that moment, she realized that both she and her teammate were on the final flight of stairs that led to the village, owing to the light that sprung forth from beneath them as they descended to the outside. Sorry about that, Sanyu-san. It was quite a walk getting here from Shizuka's office, Naruto responded to the young girl that had been assigned as their escort whilst they were in the village. Sakura felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized that the auburn-haired girl was at the center of the exit, her hands placed on her waist as she eagerly waited for the blonde man and his pink-haired teammate to walk towards her. She allowed herself to breathe a little as she realized that the girl had probably not seen Sakura hold on to Naruto's jacket at that point, as the larger man shielded most of her body from view. Naruto gleefully descended down the flight of stairs, his earlier curiosity and eagerness for adventure within this new village overwhelming him. Behind him, Sakura, having recomposed herself and managing to rid her mind of the thoughts that were plaguing her moments ago, walked quickly in order to catch up to him so as to not be left behind. However, she took note of the relaxed manner in which Naruto had addressed Sanyu, and realized that Naruto probably felt more comfortable around her than he did the ever-serious Akako. Well, it wasn't really a far-off thought. The red-haired girl seemed as if she could kill with just her stare alone if you dared cross her, a stark contrast to the cheerful girl before them. It reminded Sakura of how she acted as a girl, and the nostalgia brought a warm smile to her face. She could not help but chuckle, however, at the differences in behavior of Naruto around the two girls. Finally finding their place next to the guard, who was in the same uppity mood she had been in at the gate once she realized who Naruto was. She did not have the spear that was in her hands that morning, and was clad in much more casual clothes than she had when she was on her duty. A pink kimono, which had imprints of flowers on various spots, plus her hair had been tied up into a bun with a pin placed in it to hold it in place. The pin itself was brown, and at the end, had the imprint of a flower etched into its design, giving the girl an extremely attractive aura. Sakura found herself impressed with the simple manner in which she had dressed, yet the alluring charm that came from her was something she was scarce experienced to in her time in Konoha. She wondered if this was the girl's normal choice of attire while within the walls of her village. Beside her, Naruto had his mouth open in surprise as he was clearly impressed by how attractive Sanyu was at the moment. Sanyu, catching wind of how Naruto had his eyes on her at the moment, twirled in her vibrant kimono, and the cloth followed her brilliantly in suit. Once she had resumed her original position, she looked at Naruto, who was still dazed by the way she was dressed. Sanyu broke the silence that had enveloped the trio. "Well, Naruto, you have anything you want to say to me?" At that point, the amazement Sakura had been feeling ebbed away and she felt a vain throb in her forehead. It was the same feeling she had felt at the village entrance when Sanyu had referred to Naruto as Sama. The nerve of this girl! Sakura did not like the overly confident manner in which she talked to Naruto, since it reminded her of the way she was as a girl when she was still fawning over Sasuke because of his cool demeanor plus dashing looks. It made her feel slightly ashamed of herself, seeing her behavior from a third-party point of view at that point. "You look really good, Sanyu. Really wonderful," Naruto responded, having regained enough of his senses to respond to the younger girl. "Of course, Sanyu smiled bashfully at his compliment, offering a vibrant display of her milk-white teeth, before appreciating his remark. Why thank you, Naruto. Sakura could swear that she could spot a trace of red on the girl's cheeks at that point. However, she spoke up again, ridding herself of the embarrassment she had been feeling at Naruto's honest remark. It was the first time a man had ever complimented her in her life, but then again, Uzumaki Naruto was the first man she had the pleasure of coming across, having spent most of her life training herself as a young warrior. To her delight, the hero had been everything she had imagined him to be in her dreams. The realization set her at ease. You can refer to me as Sanyu. No need for the honorifics. I've never really been a fan of honorifics anyway, she said, smiling nervously as she was not sure whether she was making an odd request. Naruto folded his hands on his chest in thought, as he tilted his head to one side. Beside him, Sakura found his behavior a tad amusing. Well, it was certainly the first time that he had ever been asked to do such a thing, much less by a girl, so Naruto's behavior was understandable at that point. Unfolding his hands from his chest, he turned to the auburn-haired girl again, smiling brightly at her. Sure thing then. Well, it may take some time, but I'll try, Sanyu. Naruto responded to the girl, the last part of his statement a bit strange since he still had his doubts whether he should talk to her so familiarly. The kimono-clad girl before him closed her eyes and reflected his earlier smile, feeling elated that she had managed to eliminate the awkwardness that existed between her and Naruto, and bridging the gap between him and her a little. So, Sanyu-san, Sakura started, clearly finding it hard to take to the girl's overly confident aura, owing to the slight edge in her voice. Where are we supposed to head to next? Your village head said that there was a surprise that was waiting for us, she concluded, fixing the girl with a slightly impatient expression. The auburn-haired girl looked toward Sakura, repaying her with a stern expression of her own too, but realizing that Naruto was still in her presence, managed to sweeten her voice, then respond in her slightly fake tone. But of course, I will lead you there immediately. Around the three. The sky had turned a striking shade of red, as the sun retreated behind the mountains in the distant horizon. The evening was slowly setting in. The Nadeshiko Kunoichi reached out for Naruto's idle hand with her own, hoping and praying that his good nature would not prevent him from accepting her gesture of hospitality. Naruto, who was a bit befuddled to the nature of her behavior at that point, realized what she was planning to do, so he allowed himself to relax in her presence. But of course, he had not caught on to the subtle message that the girl was expressing as she took her hand into her smaller, fairer one. Still, Sanyu found she content with that, realizing that with matters of the heart, it was best to go one step at a time. To her glee, and much to Sakura's chagrin, Naruto allowed her to take his hand, placing his faith in the woman that he was in good hands. Her small hand wrapped around his warmer, big hand, the girl turned back, walking towards the center of the village, which was currently bustling with activity. Naruto felt himself being carried forward by the smaller girl, before he looked back at Sakura, shooting an expression at her to follow him and trust what Sanyu was doing. The medical ninja, who had her hands folded at her chest in a show that she was slowly losing her patience, added to the rather fast manner in which she was tapping her elbows, sighed a little, before releasing her strained posture and allowing herself to be guided by this woman, who she still had second thoughts about. As the trio of one man and two girls trudged on through the village in a rather slow manner, since Sanyu wanted them to see as many features as possible about her home, that she was overly proud of, Sakura took the chance to look around her surroundings, taking in things that particularly stood out to her. Surprisingly, there were no outstanding differences between this village and Konoha, since most of the buildings were mid-sized such as in the Leaf Village, with no outstanding skyscrapers or any particularly tall buildings of the sort. Sakura curiously noted that most of the residents she came across were all women, but they were surprisingly few, meaning they had not reached the especially populated section of the town. Further certifying her academy lessons regarding the families in this village were all organized through a system of matrilineality. It was actually quite an impressive thing, she had to admit, since it was probably the only uni-gender nation in the shinobi world. Ahead of her, Naruto himself had a jubilant expression on his face, as his eyes darted from one corner of the village to another, taking in as many features of the village as possible. Taking in all the markets, shops, and other infrastructure that was present in the village, he realized just how much he had missed such an adventure in his life for a while. While he was usually the first to ask for a mission where he would get the chance to show off his skills and growth as a ninja to his Hokage, there were times when he just longed for missions where he could get away from the usually monotonous sights and features that he had gotten so used to viewing whenever he was in Konoha. Naruto loved his village, of course, probably more than any other resident in that place, but there were times when he wished for greener pastures, a break from the life he had gotten so used to. Being in a new village, especially one that belonged to an old acquaintance of his, it was finally his chance to have a fresh breath of air, and in his mind he felt a sudden rush of appreciation for the dark-haired woman they had left in her office a while back. Just as they reached a particularly crowded section of the street, owing to the large number of people that were moving to and fro across the street, Sakura found it increasingly hard to spot the important buildings that were etched in the town as they were continuously blocked by the flurry of people present. She could only catch glimpses of the roofs of buildings, and her facial expression dulled to show the disappointment she was feeling at that moment. As she was about to resign herself to just following suit with Naruto and the woman who had his hand in his at that moment, her ears caught sight of something interesting, sourcing from the voices that were all around her. "Hey, isn't that? Yeah, it's Uzumaki Naruto." "Wah, so the rumors were true then. He really did come to our village. He's so hot, I wish I could have him in my place right now." "Idiot, watch your mouth. Don't you see that girl leading him and the one behind him? Sanyu, huh? She really looks amazing. The girl behind him might be his lover." Whispers and conversations regarding Naruto's arrival to the Maiden Village jumped from left to right, and at the last statement she picked up, of a random stranger who thought of her as Naruto's lover, immediately embarrassed her. A small part of her, however, felt a surge of pride that she was being viewed as the boy's lover by a few eyes in the village. Sakura suddenly realized the massive attention they were drawing from the people around them and the gazes and stares that followed them as they made their way down the bustling streets. Flushed, as she was not particularly used to this large amount of attention from people she was not aware of, she focused her gaze towards her front, where her fellow companions were, hoping that this way she would become less aware of all the eyes on her at the moment. To her surprise, however, Naruto was still looking at the village and still taking in its lovely features, oblivious to everyone's eyes on him at that moment. Ahead of him, Sanyu politely greeted all the villagers who happened to cross her path, her pleasantries even extending an old woman who was selling fruits by a stand at the side of the street. Well, she certainly was polite when the situation called for it, Sakura admitted, feeling a little respect for the woman. Suddenly, on the path before the trio, a woman appeared, effectively blocking their journey. Sanyu stopped, her sudden movement drawing Naruto closer to her where she could feel the warmth emanating from his body, and she felt a tad embarrassed. Luckily, Sakura had not cited this slight misunderstanding, her eyes focused on the woman who stood in their path. And she was not wrong to focus her attention on the woman, As the streets had fallen oddly silent, all eyes shifted to the new person that had just appeared. Said woman had unnaturally blonde hair that fell in waves towards her shoulders, and her eyes were a dashing shade of yellow. She was clad in an A-top that ended just above her belly, exposing her navel, and the lower half of her body was dressed in an equally short skirt, which fell to above her knees. Her legs were slender, a factor that only added to her allure, since she had a generally slender frame to the rest of her body. Her top graciously revealed some of her luscious cleavage, plus the inner mesh vest she had underneath, giving her a distant resemblance to Mitarashi Anko in that aspect. The woman's name was Yoshiko, and she was currently the village's most beautiful woman, having emerged successful in the last, Most Beautiful Kunoichi contest that was organized by the village, an event that was organized annually by the village leader, with the assistance of her advisors. Of course, one would wonder what part of such an attractive woman screamed, Kunoichi, but one had to look at the sword that was strapped to her back. The sword's name was Adira, a fitting name for a sword that was bestowed upon the most beautiful woman in the village. Yoshiko had acquired the sword after her victory in the beauty contest, as a testament to her stunning looks. There was also the tiny fact that the woman was Sanyu's idol, and Yoshiko, being a really nice person, had taken on the student on as an apprentice. This was the reason that Sanyu decided to take upon clothing which she felt would be appealing not only to herself, but to her beloved master as well. Yoshiko, immediately catching sight of the two who were accompanying her apprentice from a nearby dango store, made to walk towards the trio, in order to satiate her growing curiosity over the fact that one Uzumaki Naruto had graced the village with his presence. As she drew closer and closer to the group now in the middle of the street, and the boy with blonde hair and cerulean eyes came closer and closer within her line of view, she realized that the rumors were actually true. A wicked smile immediately adorned her facial features, as she found herself become enchanted by Uzumaki Naruto's dashing looks. As many as the rumors regarding him circulated throughout the village, as a result of Shizuka's tale regarding the boy, some of the villagers had a faint idea of what Uzumaki Naruto looked like. Sadly, Yoshiko was none of the lucky few. She was a bit disgruntled at this fact, since it gave her the slight painful feeling of being left out. However, with herself currently in the presence of the golden boy, she realized that he looked like something out of her wildest dreams. With her pride as the village's most beautiful woman, she realized that having a man like him by her side would certainly be the cherry on top of her recently acquired fame. Besides, he looked like a generally nice guy, so having someone that nice for a lover would make her life more colorful than it already was. Resolving herself as she finally came face to face with her student plus her escorts, she smiled to the auburn-haired girl, who found herself at a loss of words and a blush on her cheeks. Sakura, who had noted the behavior of the surrounding people plus the girl before them towards the newly appeared person in silence, realized that Yoshiko was probably someone prominent in the village. While she was glad that all the attention had been shifted away from them for the time being, she was still aware that all attention had now gone to the blonde beauty, who was now in their company, so she was not sure whether to feel grateful to the new face or not. Still, she looked like a fairly amiable person, so Sakura made the point to be on her best behavior before the new face. "Hello, allow me to welcome you to Nadeshiko village." Her voice was silky smooth, and a few passing girls became weak at the knees at the voice of their beloved idol, before she continued, paying no heed to the kids since she was used to such reactions from her fellow female villagers. "Well, I'm sure our village leader has already welcomed you here, so take this as an added act of hospitality." Sakura found she impressed with the graceful manner in which this girl was conversing with them. Each word that came out of her mouth was brimming with a recognizable level of respect towards them. and smiled a little at the maturity of this woman. Her earlier impression of this woman had not been betrayed, and she found herself a second person she could tolerate within this new village, aside from the green-haired girl at the gate, Hinoka. My name is Yoshiko. What's yours? Uzumaki Naruto. Pleased to meet you, Naruto responded before his female teammate could form a coherent response, his voice carrying that usual joyous tone of his, and shooting a vibrant smile at the woman. At this reply, Yoshiko raised an eyebrow in mild surprise, not expecting to be bombarded with the boy's enthusiasm off the mark like that. She had to admit, out of all the men she had encountered on her expeditions outside the village, Uzumaki Naruto was not quite like any of them. He seemed different. She felt herself filling with delight at the opportunity to meet such a refreshing man, as the ones she had encountered before did not seem overly interested in making acquaintances with her, their desires lying with her body and the fortune she carried on her back as a resident of the successful maiden village. With Naruto though, it seemed things would be completely different. Stifling a giggle as she covered her mouth with her hand, she allowed herself a moment to catch her breath before proceeding with the pleasantries. I'm Haruno Sakura. His teammate, Sakura brusquely introduced herself, once she noticed that Yoshiko had stopped giggling. She felt a sense of resulting from the fact that Naruto had not acted like a bumbling fool in front of the girl, as most of the villagers had acted once she had opened her mouth and they heard her alluring voice. She focused her green eyes to the girl's yellow eyes, a relaxed gaze in her look, and Yoshiko smiled in earnest to the girl's response. Somehow, Sakura had a feeling that the smile was not all that genuine. Yoshiko, on the other hand, could not help but feel that Sakura's presence in the village, along with her relationship to the blonde boy she had set her eyes on, might prove to be an obstacle in the near future. She pushed those thoughts to the back of her head, however, choosing to simply enjoying making the acquaintance of the fabled Uzumaki Naruto for the first time. Yoshiko-sama, Sanyu began, clearly struggling to form a sentence in the dazzling presence of the village idol. Even after she had been taken on as an apprentice, the smaller, younger girl had found herself charmed by the older girl on plenty of occasions, such as now. She knew it was unbecoming of her, of course, so she did her best to overcome the shyness and embarrassment she felt within the woman's presence. Yoshiko responded before the girl would ask why she had showed up there. Calm down, Sanyu-chan. I simply came here to accompany you to the village center. That is where you are headed, right? She inquired, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. As much as Yoshiko was adored by the folks of her village, she did not make a point of keeping up to track with any events that were organized by the village. For example, a festival held in honor of the arrival of Uzumaki Naruto. Yes, Sanyu replied a bit hurriedly. Yoshiko smiled sweetly at the girl, before stretching out a hand and lightly touching the top of the girl's soft hair. Sanyu felt the reddening on her cheeks increase with her mentor's show of affection and appreciation, while Sakura held back a chuckle at the amusement of the scene ahead of her. Naruto, well, was still engrossed with taking in the village sights, so he really was not paying attention to whatever was happening before him. So it was with that the quartet of Sanyu, Sakura, Yoshiko and Naruto headed towards the village center, where unknowingly to Naruto and Sakura, there was going to be a festival organized to welcome them into the village. At this point, however, Sanyu had let go of Naruto's hand. As she walked side by side next to her mentor, the two engaged in conversation. Naruto walked side by side with his pink-haired teammate, both hands behind his back as he followed the duo of the women before him. Sakura, immediately realizing that she had not gotten a chance to have a good talk with Naruto ever since they were intercepted by the guards at the village gate, took this as her chance to finally have a talk with Naruto. Besides, she had yet to offer her opinion regarding the place they were currently in, so there were loads of things she could talk with him about at that moment. Although there was one particular thing that stood out at the forefront of her mind, she thought, as she cheekily drew next to him and nudged his shoulder with hers. "Well, Naruto, you seem to be quite the ladies' man here," Sakura playfully remarked, finding something to tease her teammate about. Well, it was true. After all, the boy was drawing a really large number of looks everywhere he walked. "You may be more popular than Sasuke at the moment," she concluded, with a slightly higher tone and the same playful tone that she had been using before. Naruto, who became aware at the contact made between him and his teammate, cast a look of confusion at her. Leave it to Uzumaki Naruto to be out of touch with the current situation. "Wait, they are looking at me? I thought they were looking at the blonde pretty girl plus Sanyu," Naruto responded, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. Then again, Naruto was never one to be the center of attention for pretty girls, which honor always went to his best friend, Uchiha Sasuke. As Sakura had mentioned earlier, he was not sure how he would react in such a situation. The pink-haired girl beside him had half a mind to face palm at that moment, however, she knew that Naruto was never one to lie about such a matter. As much as she was relieved that he had not been aware of the looks he had been garnering, there was one thing that he had said that began to bother Sakura mentally. She drew back from him to allow him his personal space, and then said to him again, "I see, so you think she's pretty then?" Sakura of course was referring to Yoshiko, and gladly, the blonde girl was still engrossed in conversation with her cute little apprentice. She was not paying attention to what Sakura and her teammate were talking about, much to Sakura's delight. Still, Sakura could not quite get out of her mind the fact that Naruto had referred to another girl as pretty. "Well, yeah, she is pretty," Naruto replied, unsure of where the pink-haired girl was getting it with asking him something like that. In all her years of being together with the blonde, he had never outrightly called a girl he had just met pretty. Most times, such as with Sanyu earlier, Naruto had to be coerced in order to comment about the general appearance of a person, but with Yoshiko, he had referred to her as pretty. The matter made Sakura feel slightly jealous. She remembered the time when Naruto had returned to the village after his training with Jiraiya, and she had been the first person to welcome him into the village. Blushing as to how he was exuding more of an adult aura, she asked him sheepishly whether she looked more womanly. To her dismay, however, Naruto commented that she had not changed at all. The matter made her hang her head forward in slight embarrassment. Here he was again, complimenting another girl, and in Sakura's presence to boot. The pink-haired girl was seized with the desire to punch him into the neighboring wall, but managed to restrain herself. "You've never called me pretty before," Sakura muttered to herself with her face cast to the side, a childish pout on her features. Naruto, who was looking at his teammate, saw her muttering something to herself. "Sakura-chan, did you say something just now?" he asked, genuinely worried about the girl he loved. The medical ninja realized that Naruto had seen her mouth something to herself, so she immediately made to reassure him that everything was all right. "No, you're imagining things," she replied almost immediately, waving her hands in the space before her to reassure him that she did no such thing. Haruno Sakura was a terrible actor. However, Naruto did not realize this, deciding to place his trust in the girl's words. Relieved, and taking this as another chance to tease her teammate, Sakura said to the blonde boy, "You know, if you're lucky you might be able to get a girlfriend in this village. They all look like really good girls." Unknowingly, to Sakura this time, the two girls ahead of them had definitely gotten wind of the words that she had said at that moment. Sanyu's eyebrows widened in surprise, and Yoshiko simply shot a puzzled look to her equally befuddled apprentice. Then, as if reading each other's minds at that precise moment, the two realized what meaning Sakura's words carried. To their sheer luck and advantage, Naruto was not dating the pink-haired girl beside him, no matter how close he seemed to her. Originally, there seemed to be little to no hope of winning him over, courtesy of Haruno Sakura, but with her statement just then, the two girls realized that there was still hope. They had just received a green light, and planned to make full use of the chance they had received. Naruto looked to his side in embarrassment, and this time Sakura knew she had managed to unnerve him. She chuckled to herself in amusement to Naruto's cute reaction. The blonde man then rubbed the top of his head, his face still slightly flushed, and said in an albeit lower tone, just enough for Sakura to hear, "I'm not really interested in having a girlfriend at the moment." Sakura, who was looking to her teammate gleefully with her hands behind her back and the upper half of her body slightly bent forward, was surprised by what he just said. She thought she had misheard him, and her heart rate erratically increased for what seemed to be the umpteenth time that day. "Naruto, what do you? We're here," Yoshiko said. Her and her apprentice's face turned towards Naruto and his teammate, as a signal that they had reached their destination. The first thing that caught Naruto's and Sakura's attention once they had been informed by Yoshiko that they had arrived at their destination was the huge banner that had been attached in the midst of two tall trees that marked the entrance. The banner itself, a brilliant shade of snow white, had been written in a contrastingly scarlet color, "Welcome, Uzumaki Naruto and Haruno Sakura." For added effect, the words themselves were written in capital letters, an action intended to make the visitors feel more welcome than they already were feeling in the Kunoichi village. Upon seeing this banner, Naruto opened his mouth wide aghast, clearly impressed by the gesture of welcome. Placing one hand over his eyes in order to protect himself from the lingering rays of light that were still in the air courtesy of the setting sun, he arched his head slightly backwards in order to see the welcoming banner in all its glory. His eyes stayed upon the banner for an extended amount of time, his heart filling with warmth as he finally realized the surprise that Shizuka had prepared for him. Of course, he felt as if it was not necessary to go to such extremes when they were simply visitors in his another village, but then again, he was known about the matter earlier, then it wouldn't really count as much of a surprise. He felt like chuckling at this realization, whilst still feeling a great rush of affection in his chest for the dark-haired girl who had made all this possible. Sakura, on the other hand, having gotten over the initial surprise she had felt herself upon seeing the banner on which their names had been etched, focused her eyes on what lay ahead of her and her teammate. What she saw there was definitely catchier than the fancy banner. The entire field had been decorated into all sorts of colors, to offer both her and her teammate a warm welcome into the village. Trees that bore flowers of purple and pink had been planted into the ground, and they were shedding leaves, making for a beautiful display of nature's work. Her eyes drifted across the field, taking note of each thing she saw with awe and an increasing sense of surprise. There were food stands erected at a number of places underneath the trees themselves, and the aroma of the meals that were being prepared wafted into the air around, causing the pink-haired girl to feel a little hungry. Drinks were also in plenty, as she spotted a table where bottles the same color as the banner had been placed on, and Sakura immediately surmised that the bottles held sake. After all, she had seen a lot of those in her master's office back in Konoha. She wondered just how far the village had gone in preparing such a feast for her and Naruto, as her eyes fell upon stands after stands that continued to please her. Clearly, this hospitality was like none she had ever experienced before, much less even in Konoha. "Well," Sanyu spoke up, after making sure that Naruto and Sakura had both gotten their fill of eye candy upon seeing all that lay in the park. This is the surprise that Shizuka-sama had prepared for you guys. Immediately she got news of your arrival at the front gates. When she saw Naruto's cerulean eyes shining with glee at the park and all the beauties it held, she had to hold back a chuckle. She had of course expected him to act this way before they had reached this area. But his reaction just now reminded her of how she was as a girl and how she would react whenever she would attend the village festivals. It was quite a nostalgic feeling. But knowing that they could not spend the rest of the evening dilly-dallying at the entrance to the park, she made to move one step forward, placing one foot past the banner. Immediately she took a few steps inside the place. However, two girls appeared before her and the three people who were still in her company. The girls seemed to be the same age as her, something that Sakura noted keenly, but her first thought told her that these girls were here to usher them into the place. They were clad in kimonos similar to the one Sanyu was in, but theirs were of much duller colors than the vibrant one Sanyu was in, sporting the same shade of color as Sakura's hair. Beside her, her blonde teammate had similar thoughts course through his mind as he thought that the duo of girls were there to direct them to the various places inside the park. Bearing in mind that the two Konoha shinobi were new in the village and if attention was not paid they would wind up getting lost. Additionally, the aroma that had wafted in the air moments prior had lingered on Naruto's nostrils, causing him to feel an ever-increasing hunger in his gut. It couldn't really be helped. Ever since he and Sakura had left Konoha to set out for this Kunoichi village, they had not gotten a bite along the way. So Naruto realized just how ravenously hungry he was getting. He was not sure if he would be able to go a few minutes longer without a bite. To the quartet's surprise, however, one of the two girls lurched forward, grabbing Sanyu's hand, which still stood at the forefront of the group. The auburn-haired girl was immediately yanked away from the other three, catching Naruto and Sakura completely by surprise. As the stranger girl tugged at her arm to the girl's frail protests, the trio heard the girl speak up for the first time ever since she had shown up before them. "Where have you been? We've been looking all over for you so that you could help with the rest of the preparations." The stranger girl protested, addressing the auburn-haired girl whose hand she still had in her slightly firm grip. The girl was one of Sanyu's friends in the village. Sanyu, momentarily halting in her resistance, felt a tad bit embarrassed as she had forgotten that she had been instructed upon getting Naruto and Sakura to the park that she was supposed to go and help the other girls of her age group in setting up whatever else needed to be prepared for the party. She was dismayed at being robbed the chance to spend a bit more time with Naruto, but she knew that even if she had been promoted to a fully fledged shinobi a few months back, she still had her own share of duties that she needed to perform to the village. She allowed her hand to relax as she was guided forward by her friend. Sanyu's friend, realizing that her friend had fallen oddly silent ever since she had reminded her of her duties earlier, turned her face to look upon her with one of her eyes. Noticing the slight look of dismay that was on Sanyu's face, she huffed a little then addressed her friend once more. "You know, the earlier we get through with this the more time you will have to spend with your new boyfriend. Don't look so down over it," she told her in an assertive tone. Funny enough, however, Sakura, Naruto and Yoshiko had gotten wind of what Sanyu had just been told, the statement eliciting an arched eyebrow from the blonde woman. Sanyu, startled as the realization of what she had been told finally sunk in, looked at her friend in protest, one of her cheeks puffed in slight irritation. "He's not my boyfriend." "Well, not yet anyway," the auburn-haired girl protested to her friend. This statement, worded clearly enough for Sakura and Naruto to hear clearly, caused the pink-haired girl to simply exhale in exasperation this time. Ever since she had arrived at the village of Kunoichi, she realized that she had been so on edge about all the girls that neared Naruto, when perhaps she didn't have to worry so much in the first place. She had realized by that point that a good number of the women in the village all had their eyes on Naruto, intending to perchance win him over. So if she reacted each and every time one of them made a move on her blonde teammate, she would be too tired to enjoy the party that had been prepared for them. Yes, Sakura decided, resolve growing in her heart. For now all she would do was relax her nerves and not allow she to worry so much over Naruto. Besides, she trusted that he knew what to do in such situations, so she was sure things would not go awry with him and the other kunoichi. As the auburn-haired girl moved farther and farther away from Naruto and his group, she managed to turn her head for one last look at the blonde ninja. Flashing a small smile at him, she voiced to him, in a voice loud enough to be heard by everyone in the close vicinity, although they chose not to pay it much heed, being occupied with the final touches to the party themselves. I'll see you later, Naruto. Make sure you have lots and lots of fun tonight. She had placed one mouth over her mouth to make sure that he heard her loud and clear, and to her increased pleasure, she saw him wave at her enthusiastically, mirroring a smile to her as well. Yeah, you too. Work hard, Naruto voiced back at the auburn-haired girl, and at this reply she walked on with her two comrades, their duties awaiting them in the grounds. Sakura's earlier resolve, however, was going to be put to the test sooner than the pink-haired girl thought. She would soon come to realize that such things were easier said than done. Once the blonde girl who was still in their company took note that Sanyu had left her with Naruto, she immediately moved to take action, taking the leeway that had been unintentionally created for her. She placed herself next to the blonde man, and latched her arm onto his, making physical contact with him for the first time ever since she had met him on that street earlier. Naruto, slightly taken aback by her sudden gesture, looked at her curiously, and saw an innocent smile on her face as she looked at him with her bright yellow eyes. Well, he thought, it was probably nothing worth pondering over. He allowed himself to relax under her hold, and when she began proceeding forward walking further into the field, he fell into step beside her, his earlier sense of awkwardness disappearing. Unknown to him, however, once Sakura had seen what the blonde girl had done, a flash of anger crossed her eyes, but she told herself to calm down and remember what she had resolved on doing earlier. It proved hard at first, witnessing how close Naruto was with the girl, but after a few huffs of air, she realized that she had calmed her nerves. Soon after, she followed silently behind the two, allowing herself to take in the pleasantries she had not seen upon entering this field. As the blonde woman could feel the warmth from Naruto's arms seeping into her much slender one, she felt herself smiling inwardly over how lucky she had gotten. Still confident over her status as the most beautiful woman in the village, she felt a certain sense of pride that allowed her to place herself over all the other kunoichi in the village. As befitting her status, she deemed it fitting that someone as special as her ought to walk beside someone with a title as fancy as Naruto. She was the queen of Nadeshiko village, and Naruto, being the top of the shinobi world after his heroic acts in the war, was somewhat as king, so she thought it right that the two walk hand in hand to the party. A small part of her wished that such an image would draw the attention of everyone in the village, a wish that was granted mere seconds into her walk with Naruto. The eyes of the girls in the area soon shifted from whatever they were preoccupied with, and they all fell upon the duo of blondes who were in their midst. Naruto, of course, was none the wiser over the slowly growing attention he and his partner were garnering as they walked through the place, his eyes shifting from food stand to food stand, wondering where he was going to start filling his empty stomach from. Behind the two, however, Sakura had also grown self-conscious over all the attention focused on the people ahead of her, but it was then that she noticed something odd regarding the people who now surrounded them. She did not know why she had not realized it earlier, but now that she looked around, she noticed that most of the people in this area were all girls, roughly her age, give or take a few years for some of them. The street they had been on once they had exited Shizuka's office had been populated by mostly middle-aged women, who seemed to be in their 20s or 30s, a few teenagers thrown into the mix. Things now seemed to make more sense for the pink-haired girl, as she came to the conclusion that most of the village's younger population had been all gathered to prepare this festival, eagerly looking forward to surprising the two guests in their midst. However, she concluded, with a sinking feeling in her chest, that she probably would not have a chance to converse with Naruto that evening, as most of the girls were surely guaranteed to be fighting over his attention. The group of three walked on in silence for a few more minutes, Yoshiko bathing in all the attention and the envy that came her way, before she stopped and lightly tugged on Naruto's elbow for him to stop as well. She finally let go of his shoulder, feeling more pleased than dismayed at this, before quickly raising her toes slightly to whisper into his ear, "Let's do this again next time." The slight breeze that followed her words sent a ticklish feeling to Naruto's ear, bringing him out of the half-focused state he was in and causing him to hastily respond to her with a nod. He had not caught on to all she had said, unknown to her, but his response was still enough to cause her to erupt in a smile, spasms of joy welling up in her. Without any further word from her, she broke away from Naruto and Sakura, walking towards a group of kunoichi who she was well acquainted with. Once she had broken away from Naruto's company though, a swarm of girls who seemed to have been waiting for their chance to talk to the hero immediately appeared in front of him, surrounding him in all directions as each of them talked at the same time, trying to catch the attention of the blue-eyed man. Yoshiko had half expected this, and had an uncanny feeling in her chest that the reason why Naruto had not been swarmed by the girls yet was because of how they viewed the blonde girl in awe. She walked on towards the group of her friends that were in conversation at one of the food stands, a smirk slowly gracing her face as she surmised that she was already one step ahead of all the other women who had the same intentions regarding Naruto, since she had already made her move, a mighty bold one if she had to say so herself. She was a step ahead of all the other girls, so it would be a while before she made her move on the blonde again. Her victory was already set in stone. Sakura seemingly shared the same expectations as Yoshiko, regarding the horde of girls that seemed to appear in a flash once the blonde's overbearing presence had left Naruto's side. She watched idly behind him as girl after girl struggled to talk to the hero, some of them smiling in bliss after he uttered a greeting to them, and a handful of others surprisingly asking for his autograph, something that she had never been witness to before. As she watched Naruto growing increasingly nervous with each new face that popped up in front of him, she remembered nostalgically that it was the same scene that had been present once he had returned from his defeat of Pain and the villagers all had him engaged in conversation. It was quite an amusing sight to replay, she thought, as she moved away from him and took a seat next to one of the food stands. The sun had long been engulfed in the horizon, and lanterns had already been lit at set areas of the park. Realizing that she had forgotten her hunger due to all that had happened, her stomach growling with a small noise, she decided to indulge herself in some of the food that had been prepared as she watched the comedic antics that were happening between her teammate and the village folks. As she watched Naruto grow increasingly nervous under all the attention he had been subjugated towards, Sakura remembered that Naruto was never really one that was good with crowds, especially with people that he had just met. With his friends in Konoha, of course it was a different thing, since he had grown up around them ever since he was a kid, but this time it was entirely different. The crowd of women never seemed as if it was going to dwindle by even one person, growing larger and larger by the minute, similar to the small beads of perspiration that had broken over Naruto's face. He was not sure if he was going to survive through the night, being bombarded left, right and center by the never-ending queries regarding things around him. Luckily for Naruto, however, and as a development that came as a surprise to Sakura, a lone girl in the crowd brought forth a plate towards her blonde teammate, beckoning him shyly to partake of its contents. Naruto eyed the plate suspiciously for a few moments, seeing a dish that he had never laid his eyes on in Konoha, before hesitatingly reaching out for the chopsticks that lay next to the dish and inhaling it in one gulp. He chewed on the food for a few minutes, his eyes darting from side to side as he tried to grasp a taste on the food he had been presented with. An eerie silence enveloped the air around him and the girls surrounding him, as they unknowingly waited his judgment on what was one of their village's dishes. Naruto swallowed, and a smile etched upon his face to the girl that had presented him with the dish, and he flashed her thumbs up while telling her that her food was tantalizing. At this tender show of appreciation, however, it seemed the floodgates had opened upon the crowd of kunoichi. They soon rushed off in different directions, each of them heading to one of the numerous food stands in the vicinity as they had finally found something that pleased their esteemed guest. Naruto simply stood in confusion, blinking twice as he tried to understand what had just happened, and just as he prepared himself to take one step forward and walk around the park farther in order to witness more of it, the girls soon returned. It seemed only a second ago that they had broken away from him empty-handed, but this time, each of them held a plate in their hands, and none of the plates held the same content. It seemed to Sakura as if Naruto had just been presented with all the food that was dined upon in this village, so to the girls he would be some form of taste tester for them. She watched closely as Naruto was presented with a different dish by each girl that appeared before him, his face switching between different expressions each time he emptied the plate's contents to his stomachs. Surprisingly, a few of the girls were thoughtful enough to carry the white bottles that she had witnessed upon her entry to the park, and a nagging feeling in Sakura's chest told her that each of the bottles contained a different flavor of sake. The girls holding these bottles also had their chances to appear before Naruto, intending to please him as much as the girls that had brought him all forms of delicacies. At first she was worried regarding Naruto's intake of alcohol, but remembering that he had come of legal drinking age after the war, allowed herself to relax as she also partook of the food that had been prepared in the food stall before her. The thoughts she had banished earlier regarding keeping Naruto away from these women resurfaced momentarily in her mind, but going through them again, she realized that it was probably not going to be worth it. She surmised that even if by some sort of miracle she managed to wrench Naruto away from the overly eager girls, such a solution would only be temporary, since they were supposed to be in the village for a week. The girls were still going to get plenty more chances to talk to Naruto, meaning her efforts would be rendered meaningless shortly afterwards. Additionally, her mind told her that doing something like that would only serve to antagonize the residents of the village. Something that she already knew would not be in her favor so early into their vacation. The villagers had their sights on the same man as she had for a while now, so her small objections were extremely plausible. Remembering her time as a kid, when she had competed with her best friend over the affection of one raven-haired Uchiha, she vowed to herself not to ever allow such an incident to occur again. Her cheeks flushed slightly as she remembered just how uncouth she had acted back then in the hopes of getting the affections of someone who had never as much as spared her a second of his time, and she vowed to herself that she would never let anything that ridiculous take over her time ever again. Her friendship with Yamanaka Ino had of course been repaired over the course of time, the two even growing more comfortable around each other to use nicknames over each other. But the scars over what had torn apart their friendship in the first place still lingered. It would take a while for them to cover completely, Sakura thought, her stomach gradually filling up with what she was partaking. She had to admit that the food in Nadeshiko would certainly put any of the cooks in Konoha to shame, wondering just how on earth they prepared such mouth-watering dishes. While the pink-haired girl was preoccupied in her thoughts, a certain green-haired woman approached her, taking up a seat beside her. "What? All these girls proved too much for you to handle," she said, making herself comfortable next to the pink-haired girl and calling for her attention. Sakura, brought out of her momentary daze, darted her eyes to the green-haired girl, vividly remembering her as the girl who she had conversed with at the village gates a few hours back. Hinoka, now assured that she had managed to catch Sakura's attention, placed a plate full of almonds next to the pink-haired girl, smiling softly at her and silently offering her the plate of fruit. Sakura, wondering what to make of the green-haired girl since the two had not exactly gotten off on the right foot when they first talked, hesitantly reached out her hand to take one of the almonds, and plopped it in her mouth. It melted on her tongue, filling her mouth with sweetness, and she felt her doubts regarding the green-haired girl's intentions slowly ebbing away. Once she had swallowed the fruit and reached out her hand for another one, she opened her mouth to speak to the green-haired girl for the first time that evening, chuckling a little as she had not expected to run into the girl so soon. "Not really. Besides, Naruto can talk to any girl he wants to talk to besides me. It's really not something for me to fret over," the pink-haired girl stated matter-of-factly, a confident look in her eyes as she looked into Hinoka's lime green eyes. Hinoka, taking one of the almonds herself, looked at Sakura silently for a while as she studied the girl's facial expression, paying attention to what she had just said then. Sakura herself had not seemed to realize the implications of what she had said, something Hinoka noted with a growing smirk on her face. "You know," she said, placing one of the sweet fruits in her mouth, "you just sounded like his girlfriend with what you just said," she stated slyly, allowing the almond to travel down her throat. At this statement, however, Sakura nearly choked on the fruit that was in her mouth, looking back at Hinoka in disbelief. It was just then that she realized the implications of what she had told Hinoka earlier, her cheeks growing slightly beet red at the slight embarrassment she felt. The green-haired girl was not quite done with Sakura yet, opening her mouth to conclude on what she had further realized then, "And with that just now, I have the complete answer to the question I asked you at the gate." "Now was that too hard?" she said, a slight playful tone in her voice as she eyes Sakura curiously. Sakura, having managed to recompose herself and regain the usual color of her cheeks, cleared her throat momentarily as she searched for a way to retaliate at the girl. Finding none, with slight disappointment, she decided to return the ball to Hinoka's court, realizing that any retaliation she used would probably be used against her, since the girl whose company she currently shared could read her lie a book. "What about you?" she started, her confidence slightly waning, but managing to regain control of her shaky voice. "Why aren't you joining in their company? It could be your chance to win over the hero of the shinobi world," Sakura stated, as she folded her hands on her chest, inwardly congratulating herself over finding something she was sure Hinoka would not be able to turn against her. To her slight surprise, however, the green-haired girl fell silent for a few minutes. Her eyes focused on Naruto, who was still taking in all the foods that had been placed before him, albeit at a much slower rate than he had been earlier, before she finally opened her mouth to reply to Sakura, her face in an oddly serious expression. "HMPH. Well, I have to admit it is a really tempting offer, but with stuff like this the right thing to do is bide your time and wait patiently for things to unfold. You could also borrow a leaf from that," she said, looking at Sakura from the side of her face as her attention was still focused on Naruto. Sakura widened her eyebrows in surprise, never expecting to hear such a reply for someone who seemed to ooze with confidence. It was a stark contrast from the slight arrogance that Yoshiko seemed to possess, but somehow she had thought for a while now that Hinoko was the kind of girl who would plunge headfirst for anything she wanted. She had just realized that she had never been more mistaken in her first impressions of someone. The girl seated beside her seemed to be an enigma of a character, more so with her last statement, but oddly enough, Sakura found herself not minding the company of the greenhead. Perhaps spending the rest of the evening engaged in idle chatter with the woman would not be such a bad prospect, the pink-haired kunoichi thought, closing her eyes momentarily before finally realizing what she would talk about with Hinoko. Naruto, who was gradually getting fuller and fuller with each dish presented before him, realized that it would be a while before he would be unable to eat anymore. He was extremely grateful that the hunger that he had been feeling earlier was now a matter of the past, but now he was unsure just how he would tell the girls politely that he had already eaten to his fill. He had already reached his limit in drinking, to the displeasure of a few girls, and he was unsure how the obviously larger number of food girls, he had opted to refer to them that way since he could not remember any of the names they had told him, would react once he told them that he could not eat anymore would react. As he took in what was his second last plate for the day, fearing that he was reaching his limit earlier than he had expected. To his relief, however, all the girls immediately shifted their attention away from him, focusing on the stage that was being set a few meters away from them. Naruto wondered how come he had not caught on to such a minuscule detail earlier. All around him, he noticed the girls were all momentarily dazed, their hands frozen on their plates and their eyes shining in eagerness. Naruto looked at each of them in confusion, wondering what they were waiting for with much anticipation, before he saw someone walking towards the stage from the opposite side, accompanied by screams and shrieks from the audience. The woman herself was clad in a snow-white kimono, which started from her shoulders, exposing a little of her milky chest and a sizable amount of cleavage that made Sakura feel slightly mortified, and the kimono fell beautifully till her legs. It parted in two just above her knees, the two segments continually separating from each other, giving everyone present a luscious view of her equally milky legs that seemed to be quite the right size. Her hair was jet black, tied up into a bun that was completed with a golden pin that ran through the back of her hair. She had equally dark eyes, and there was a faint shade of red lipstick on her supple lips, and an equally faint shade of the same color upon her rosy cheeks. She was the most refined dancer in Nadeshiko. Her name was Mara. Her dance was said to entrance anyone who bore witness to it, of course even outside the walls of the village. As she walked gracefully to the stage that had been set before her so that she could entertain the villagers and their honored guests with a dance to add to the festive mood that had seized the air, she shifted her eyes to her side, and momentarily captured the gaze of the blue-eyed man who was in the midst of all the villagers. Surprise washed over her, and she momentarily threatened to stop to get a better glimpse of the blonde man, but realizing that she was under the watch of numerous eyes, pressed on until she reached her stage. She had been so preoccupied with preparing for the night's entertainment that she had failed to remember on what account the feast was being held. The news of course had reached her ears that Uzumaki Naruto was in the village, but she had not dwelled on it, as she deemed him a man beneath her stature. However, bearing witness to him now, taking account of the mop of blonde hair on his head that shared the same color as the sun, and his cerulean eyes that bore the same color as the deep blue sea, she realized that she might have been a bit too hasty in her judgment of him. Taking a small bow in front of the crowd that she had unwittingly drawn in, although it was a spectacle that she had witnessed numerous times before, she resolved silently in her heart to dance the best she could that night. Perhaps this night would not be as dull as all the nights that had come and gone in the village, that she had been witness to but had never managed to raise her spirits as they had been raised today. Behind her, two performers took their places with their instruments ready, garbed in what seemed to be the traditional wear of the village. A few seconds later, the air in the park was grabbed by a sweet sensation that would send even crying babies to sleep. A beautiful melody rung in the air, and with it accompanied the nimble movements of the dancer, moving as soundlessly as water in her body, seeming as if it swayed with the slight breeze that was present in the air. Beneath her, the girls who had waited eagerly to witness her breathtaking dance were not disappointed by what they lay witness to. This time, however, it seemed as if her dance sparked a fire within them, something that told the older ones among them that she was showing them her best colors that night. With each movement she made, oohs and ahs followed after her, none of the crowd threatening to break their gaze away from the woman. As the dancer on stage moved on the platform that was now hers, her eyes shifted from corner to corner of the crowd. However, they lingered a few seconds longer upon the blue eyes that were in the middle of the crowd, unknown to everyone who surrounded her. Occasionally, she would send a wink or two at him, but the women around him all thought those gestures belonged to them, taken in body, heart and soul by the dark-haired woman's dance. Naruto, on the other hand, had the uncanny feeling that those subtle gestures were all sent his way, although he did not have the faintest idea why. The blonde man, however, realized that he could not have asked for a better chance to break away from the crowd he was currently swallowed in than the one that was currently presented before him. He felt slightly grateful to the mysterious dark-haired woman, making a mental note to thank her later if he ran into her on one of his trips in the village. Not that he minded the company of the girls around him. On the contrary, he loved how hospitable they had been to him ever since the festivities had began, but he wanted to do a little exploring of his own for a while, and he knew that such a suggestion would be unheard of to the girls. He still had no idea how he would be able to decline their kindness politely. As he made his way through the crowd looking for a way through the back, he noted silently the stark difference that existed between the kunoichi of this village and the kunoichi of his home village. The ones in Nadeshiko seemed a tad more direct than the ones he was used to in Konoha, something he was not sure what to make of as it pleased him and slightly unnerved him at the same time. Once he had broken away from the crowd he had been in and found himself finally able to stretch his arms and legs for the first time in what seemed a millennium, he began looking around for a familiar face that he would be able to hang out with for a while. The first person that had come to mind was his teammate, a bit embarrassed that he had forgotten about her for a while now. His eyes shifted from area to area of the park, looking for any sign of pink hair, but the park was so full that he could barely make out any of the people in it. Dismayed, he folded his hands on his chest, a small pout on his face as he tried pondering over his next course of action. A dark-haired girl, who possessed the same color of eyes as his teammate, popped up in his mind and he wondered how come she had slipped from his mind completely. She was the primary reason that he and Sakura were within the village, which she also served as leader of, so it did not make sense why he had not caught any sign of Shizuka all throughout this celebration. The thought made him a little sad, since the party was held thanks to her efforts, so he wanted to thank her for showing them a good time on their first night in the village. He walked through the park, his eyes darting from food stall to food stall as he looked for any sign of Sakura or Shizuka, before his eyes soon settled on a red shade of hair that was seated under one of the pink-flowered trees. While his mind had been constantly racing all day with a multitude of thoughts, he realized that he would never forget such a lovely shade of red so soon after encountering her at the gate. Akako was currently seated fewer than one of the trees, deeper into the park, seemingly enjoying the solitude she was currently in. Once Naruto had been aware of where she was seating, a slight sense of coldness passed through his body, realizing that he still did not feel that comfortable around the red-haired guard. However, he realized that he did not exactly have much of a choice at the moment, since he could not spot any familiar faces around. Sanyu and Yoshiko seemed to have disappeared off somewhere, or perhaps they were in the midst of the crows that feasted upon the dancer. He did not have much choice at the moment, choosing to walk closer and closer to the red-eyed girl, who had a bottle of sake at one side, the other side taken by the spear that she had first prodded Naruto with on their first meeting. Naruto found himself, what on earth would possess someone to cause them to bring a spear to a party? But then again he remembered vividly that upon his first meeting with a certain blonde beauty, she had a sword strapped to her back. She had not opted to drop the sword anywhere en route to the festival ground, so maybe Yoshiko still had her weapon in hand. The thought calmed him down as he was finally a stone's throw away from Akako. The red-haired girl, noticing that someone was drawing nearer and nearer to her, opened her eyes slowly and they came to rest upon Naruto's blue ones. Her hand momentarily moved to the spear that lay at her side before she figured out who it was that approached, but upon realizing it was the boy from that morning, she allowed herself to relax. Naruto, taking this as a sign that he was welcome to share in Akako's company, slowly placed himself on the ground next to the red-haired woman, carefully placing her sake jar on his thigh as he did not want to know what would happen if he accidentally broke it. He had already seen enough of Tsunade's tantrums when she did not find any of the sake bottles she stashed so carefully in her wardrobe. The two sat in silence, Akako still keeping her eyes closed, before she broke the ice that had fallen in place between her and Naruto. "Are you lost?" she asked him, and Naruto was surprised to see that her eyes were open again and they were peering at him curiously. He shifted a little uncomfortably under her stare, rubbing the back of his head nervously as he wondered how he would answer that. A nervous chuckle escaped his lips as he tried to recompose himself, then he said, trying to express confidence, in a matter of speaking, "Yes." His reply had come out a bit more directly than he had intended, something that surprised him but made him glad since he had stopped shifting nervously. Akako eyed him silently for a few minutes, before slowly raising one of her fingers and pointing in a direction behind Naruto. Naruto wondered why she was doing that, but he nonetheless looked in the said direction, his body slowly arching backwards when his eyes rested upon a blotch of pink hair. He gasped in surprise, wondering why he had not chosen to look in that direction earlier. "If you're looking for your teammate, she's over there with Hinoka," Akako stated bluntly, her eyes back to their usual closed manner. Naruto's gaze lingered a while longer in the direction that she had pointed it, taking note of the manner in which Sakura occasionally laughed in her conversation with the green-haired girl. He smiled softly, realizing that she seemed perfectly content in the company she was in, so there was no need for him to butt in and steal away her chance at making her first friend in the maiden village. Pleased, he returned to his usual posture, looking at the boisterous crowd before him that seemed to grow bigger and bigger with each passing minute. Akako caught note of this seemingly unusual behavior, so she decided to ask him, "You're not going to go and join her?" She asked, her eyes focused in him once more. Naruto, realizing just how comfortable he was feeling currently, closed his eyes momentarily, then replied in a much calmer voice, "Nah, she looks like she's having fun with her friend. There's no need for me to do anything." The red-haired woman tilted her head slightly at his response, finding it unbecoming from someone like the blonde, but nonetheless decided to give the matter a rest, mumbling to herself softly, "I see." Naruto then spoke up again, catching the red-haired woman by surprise for the first time that evening. "Besides, you seem like an interesting person yourself, so spending time with you for a while might not be a bad idea." In his excitement at having finally dissolved the nervousness he had been feeling regarding the red-haired woman, Naruto failed to notice that for a split second, her cheeks had turned a fainter shade of color than her hair. Akako was not exactly used to receiving offhanded comments about her personality, or anything about her in general, placing more emphasis in her training more than anything, so she did not know how she was supposed to react in such a situation. The blonde man, oblivious to how he had flustered the girl beside him, pressured on with the conversation, still in the uppity mood he had been in for a while now. "Why aren't you joining in with the others? I think you'll have fun if you join in with them." It was more a query than anything, but surprising herself as much as him. The red-haired girl did not pause before answering this time. "I don't especially like gatherings like this one." Naruto looked at her curiously, but she continued, answering the question that had nearly rolled out of his mouth next. "I'm only here because Hinoka asked me to accompany here. Plus the guard at the gate changes at night, so I couldn't turn her down," she added on, her eyes focused on the crowd ahead of her. All of a sudden, she found it a bit difficult to look into Naruto's eyes, surprising herself further, as she had not found it difficult to do so on the previous occasion the two had talked. The blonde man let out a stifled sound, before an idea popped up in his mind and he turned on the red-haired woman again, feeling joyous that he had found one who seemed to be in the same moods as him at that moment. What a coincidence. "I'm not feeling so social at the moment. Mind if I sit next to you for a while?" he asked her, and she could feel his blue eyes peering at her closely as he unknowingly closed the distance between them. The girl in question brusquely nodded at his question, causing him to let out a shriek of joy as he pumped his fist into the air. To his dismay, however, as soon as he had braced himself for a conversation with the girl who he had suddenly found a whole load of interesting, there was a slight breeze behind him, and Akako turned her head slightly to catch wind of whoever had just appeared behind her and Naruto. Naruto, thinking that it was just a stray wind, continued peering at the red-haired girl, before a voice suddenly spoke up behind him. "Uzumaki Naruto-kun, it's a pleasure to meet you once again." Startled, Naruto nearly jumped out of his skin, but he turned his head to meet the source of the voice. He was surprised to discover that the voice came from someone familiar, remembering that the woman was there the first time he had met Shizuka. Her head was lowered slightly, giving Naruto a glimpse of her spiky brown hair, as she was on one knee, her eyes closed in a manner of respect towards the man. Feeling uncomfortable by a gesture which he felt did not fit him, Naruto moved to stop the girl. No, it's okay, Takiwa-san. You don't need to act so formal with me," he started, a bit fidgety as he was not used to being addressed with such formality, especially from someone that he was already acquainted with. The older woman looked slightly upwards, focusing her black orbs on Naruto's blue ones, momentarily looking beside him to take note of the woman in his company. Naruto, pleasantly surprised to see the older woman again, found himself wondering why she had shown up that late, much less without Shizuka, who seemed to always be in her company. She spoke again, disclosing the reason that she had come to the gathering, and clearing Naruto's doubts. "Shizuka-sama has sent me here to come get you and show you where you will be taking up residence while staying in our village." Naruto's batted an eyebrow, looking at the dark-eyed woman for a while, before realizing that perhaps lingering longer at the party would not be in his best interests. After all, he was not sure what kind of a schedule he would have in this foreign place, and did not want to impose upon his hosts so much. Getting up softly from his position on the grass, he dusted himself a bit before moving forward to take his place next to the brown-haired woman. As he moved forward though, he felt a tug at his jacket, and looked down to find Akako tugging at him with one hand. Curiously, he looked at the red-haired girl, who proceeded to fish out something from the grass lying beside her, and seconds later her hand came out with a package that was in the shape of a weapon. Or at least Naruto thought it was. He stretched out his hand slowly and took the package, eyeing it curiously and getting a feel of it while it rested under his grasp. He brought it closer to his face, spinning it to look around, before asking the red-haired girl, "What is it?" Akako, who kept her gaze on Naruto the whole time he had been looking at her package, released his jacket from her small grip and answered him, "It's a welcome present. I thought it would make you feel more welcome here in our village." A warm feeling grew in Naruto's gut at her reply, and he smiled brightly at the girl, bringing his hand to the top of her head and patting her hair slightly. It felt soft. "Thank you, Akako." Before he was taken away via dance step by the older woman that had come to fetch him, he could swear that he had seen the faint outline of a smile on the usually stoic Akako. It was the first sign of happiness that he had seen on her, and somehow, it filled him with satisfaction, giving him a good feeling as he made away from the rest of the people in the festival. A few minutes later Naruto, who had just been shown the room he was to take residence in, found himself amazed at how splendid the place looked. It was no different from his house in Konoha, with a bed, a lamp and a bathroom plus a toilet, but somehow, it felt more grand. There was much more space than he was used to living in, plus there was adequate ventilation owing to the windows that were in each room. The other rooms of the house, which included the kitchen, sitting room and dining room, were way bigger than his, and he could not help but smile at the affection he could feel placed into making this room. He decided that he was going to do the villagers a favor and take extra care of the room, something that he seldom did when he was in Konoha. Once he was done looking around the house, he decided to take a long nap, while thinking of what he was going to do the next day. He placed Akako's package on the table next to his bed, deciding that he would unwrap it the following morning, and offer his thanks to the woman no matter what he found inside. He had placed himself atop his bed and was just about to call it a day, when he heard a knock on the door of his sitting room. Perplexed, he extricated himself from the bed and walked towards the door, wondering who on earth had decided to pay him a visit when it was that dark. It must have already been midnight, as the full moon was already sky-high. As he slowly turned the doorknob, his first thought was that it was his pink-haired teammate, something that caused his heart to skip a beat. If it really was Sakura, then he was certain that this would be the perfect icing on the cake that had been that festival. Something nice that would top off the long and strenuous day that he had. Swinging the door open and being hit by a small gust of wind that sent his hair flowing backwards, he found himself looking into a green pair of orbs. However, they were not Sakura's. "Shizuka?" the blonde man asked, surprised. A few minutes after that too, Sakura was walking on the street that led to where she had been told Naruto was taking residence by Hinoka. With each step she took, she felt herself getting dizzier and dizzier, her head growing lighter and her vision growing dangerously blurry. Somewhere along some lines in the party, Hinoka had coerced her into taking a few gulps of the sake, insisting that it was prepared on account of Naruto and Sakura, and if she refused to take it, it would be an insult to the hospitality of Nadeshiko. Sakura had finally given in, but had forgotten one crucial thing. She could not hold her bottle. A drinking session in the past with her master that had been a result of a bet had made this crystal clear to her. She struggled to make herself walk straight, but a few steps later had her wobbling dangerously. She had already settled into her residence, courtesy of the green-haired girl who was sort of her friend, so all she needed now was to see Naruto and make sure that he was okay. Wish him a good night then call it a day. However, with the pace she was walking with, she was not sure whether she would be able to make it to his house in one piece. Finally reaching his front door, after what seemed an eternity of walking, she recomposed herself and prepared to knock on his door, thanking Kami that she had managed to shake off the worst of her hangover. Before she could place a hand on the door, however, she heard the mumbling of voices in the house, something that caught her completely by surprise. She realized that there was no way her teammate could be talking to himself, no matter how much of an idiot he was, coming to the conclusion that there was someone else in the room with him at that moment. She could not fathom what on earth someone would be doing at someone else's residence in the darkness of the night, when the only source of light originated from the lamps erected at certain positions of the street. At first, she had opted to leave and come back in the morning, but her curiosity got the better of her, making her want to find out who it was that had paid Naruto a late-night visit. It was obviously a woman. The only male in the entire village at the moment was Naruto. And so Sakura noiselessly pressed her eye to a small hole that had been fitted into the door to allow whoever was inside to look at who had decided to pay them a visit. The first thing she saw when she had pressed her eye to the hole was her blonde teammate, and he was standing opposite a dark-haired woman. Sakura did not need to be told that the woman was Shizuka. She had taken note of the medium-sized hair that the woman sported when she was in her office earlier. Sakura wondered what had caused her to visit Naruto so late into the night, thinking to herself that if it was such an important matter it could wait a few more hours into the morning. The two seemed to be in some conversation, causing the increasing nervousness in Sakura to quell a bit, and she silently exhaled in relief, wondering what had caused her to get so riled up in the first place. Shizuka was Naruto's friend, so such a thing was perfectly normal, of course. However, what followed next could hardly be considered normal between people who referred to each other as friends. It seemed to happen in slow motion. As Sakura was about to avert her gaze from the two conversing people, Shizuka stood on her toes and planted a kiss on Naruto's lips, to Sakura's utter shock.